We're going to try to do a series of videos illustrating what's going on with flooding and sea level rise in eastern Virginia. We'll call it Sea Level Rise Sojourn. And this is the first of a series. We're in a neighborhood in Norfolk that floods frequently, that provides a number of illustrations of just what's going on with sea level rise and flooding and all the federal programs associated with it. And we're just going to try to break the issue down in ways that anybody can understand. Wetlands Watch got into sea level rise because we want the wetlands to survive into the future. Here's a sort of typical pocket wetland in an urban area. The rates of sea level rise that we're seeing in southeast Virginia are roughly 4.5 feet by the end of the century. Wetlands can move vertically about 2 feet a century. They move vertically by trapping sediment and growing on last year's sediment and gradually elevating themselves. If the wetlands are facing sea level rise that's beyond their ability to go vertically, they've got to move horizontally. They've got to basically migrate uphill. But in so many areas, and this is a classic example, these wetlands can't move uphill because there's something behind it that's blocking them. As they try to move uphill, they're going to run into a sidewalk, a street, lots of things that are going to keep them from moving uphill. And this is why we're going to lose a whole lot of our tidal wetlands in the coming decades. We estimate that we're probably going to lose 50 to 80% of wetlands like this in Virginia by about 2080, not that far off. So what you've got here also is a classic conflict between the need for natural resource protection and the need for private property protection. So this street that's behind us here used to flood all the time. And so the city elevated it about 18 inches, cost them $1.2 million. One block of road, $1.2 million. They had to do more than raise the road. They had to reset the utilities and the rest. But $1.2 million to elevate the road, what they've done is they've created an even higher barrier behind this marsh. In making a public investment to protect the private property and the tax base, what they've done is they've doomed this wetland to drowning in place. And it's not just this wetland, it's thousands of acres of wetlands throughout the state that are going to go underwater. So, classic conflict between the need for the city to protect private property, to maintain the tax base, protect public health and safety, and the need of this ecosystem, of these wetlands to move uphill. And so in coming decades, we can come back to the same point and see how this conflict plays out. Here's an example of where you can see that flooding is occurring frequently, and frankly, the marsh ecosystem is moving back in. You can see the different grass that's growing where I'm standing here in the low spot. There's a marsh goldenrod popping up here, but you can see this bare spot. What happens is the water's coming back up out of these stormwater systems, and it's salt water. This is a tidal river here. So the salt water is coming up out of that stormwater grate and flooding this low area. And over time what happens is it kills all the grass because the grass doesn't like to be in salty water all the time. You can also see that it's doing flooding frequently because there's algal mats here. So this is becoming a marsh ecosystem, and it's because of sea level rise. So here's another example of the ecosystem shift that's taking place as sea level rises. There's a stormwater grate there that's connected to the water over there, and when the water rises, the water comes out of the storm grate. It runs in the wrong direction. It's supposed to go that way, it comes this way, and it begins to flood this area. And this area gets flooded so often that you can see the shift that's starting to occur. These are wetlands plants here, and they're starting to move across the sidewalk and into this zone, and they're starting to emerge here where it's wettest. But again, you can see the salt crust. This area gets inundated by salt water. You can see the algal mats. It gets wet so often that there's algae here. So, again, you see areas like this in a lot of neighborhoods where it used to be wetlands 100 years ago, and it's going to be a wetland again in just a few decades. Okay, so what we've got here is more evidence of the change that's taking place in this neighborhood in Norfolk. This is a bulkhead that runs around this entire neighborhood. Again, this all used to be a big wetland area. Put the bulkhead in, fill it up, put the road in, build the houses. In the 1920s, that's the way we did things. Well, now the water keeps coming up underneath and over top. And what it's doing is it's starting to break through that bulkhead, and the erosion is about to touch the street. So the city's going to have to come in here and fix this. But the problem is, it's not just here. There's a break up there, there's a break down there. There are numerous places where this, I don't know how old this bulkhead is, but it's pretty old, where this bulkhead is breaking. So the city is going to have to come in and replace this bulkhead in order to protect the road. But they've also got to start taking into account the increased flooding and the elevated sea level rise. So how tall is this bulkhead going to have to be in order to adequately protect the road and the houses from flooding? And this is going to be a very expensive project because this bulkhead runs all the way around this neighborhood. So this is just one small piece of public infrastructure that's starting to go away because of sea level rise, because of increased storm intensity. And it's just one more expense that's piling on top of other expenses here in Norfolk as we try to deal with sea level rise. Oh, and one more thing. Just building this seawall up to protect against storm surge is not going to keep the flooding out of this neighborhood. As we've seen in other snapshots around this neighborhood, the water is coming up underneath the bulkhead, and it literally comes up out of the ground in the cracks in the pavement at the edge of the curb, and it floods the neighborhood up from underneath. So the eventual solution for this is not going to be simply fixing this bulkhead. Basically, all of this stuff is just buying time. The eventual solution is going to be to get some of these folks out of here and start buying these houses out, because there isn't much you can do when the water starts coming up out of the ground.